is survival of the fittest. This is Curtis and the Gov on AM 970. The Answer.
Something happening here. Yeah. What it is ain't exactly clear.
6 minutes after the hour of 6, ladies and gentlemen, we return as we do every Tuesday night. We're in the middle of our mayoral forum / city controller forum here at the Statler Grill, 33rd between 6th and 7th. Max and Vinny, owner and operators, have rolled out the red carpet. And through the gracious friendship that former Governor David Patterson has bestowed upon all of us, we asked him one thing only. And we said, don't bother coming to the Statler Grill unless you have your very dear Kumbada Chief, Scott Stringer, hand in hand with you
and
tonight,
he's
Tuesday.
Here.
And you've delivered, Governor David Patterson. But in the last 24 hours, if you watched the TV news, if you read the newspapers, you, Scott Stringer, Manhattan Borough President, seeking to become the next city controller, running for the Democratic nomination September 10th against Elliot Spitzer. You and the Gov have been like twins. Siamese twins. You have been campaigning together. You have been doing commentary together. You've been kissing babies together. You've been doing lit drops together, knocking on doors together. I have never seen two politicians more attached at the hip than you and Governor David Patterson. And I understand the history is you were both baptized in the womb in politics. You come from political families where you were making your bones at a very early age, not playing with G.I. Joe dolls, but putting up political posters for Democratic candidates. Where did this friendship come about, and why is it so strong? Scott Stringer.
Well, it's great to be on the show. I have arrived. I'm very excited. This is great. Curtis Sliwa and David Patterson. So thank you for inviting me. So David and I go back in the day when I was supporting, as a young guy, Jerry Nadler, who was running for borough president against David Dinkins. And David was working and running the Dinkins campaign. I was helping my guy, Nadler. We were all friends. And David and I got to be close. And then when Jerry lost and David Dinkins won, there was a vacant state Senate seat. And David Patterson called up and said, I want to run. And Jerry and I and everybody from the West Side embraced David from Harlem. And we built this very powerful relationship between Harlem and the West Side that has stayed true for 30 years. I was very, very young at that time. David's much older. And so I've learned at his knee.
Wow. And, you know, he has been pounded for not coming out and supporting Elliot Spitzer since he's entered the race. And yet every time I've put him under cross-examination, and this is true, like last night, Governor Patterson, every time I've put you under the electron microscope about your support, it seems to only strengthen for Scott Stringer, not weaken. Why is that? What is this bond that you have with Scott that developed way back in time?
I'll just cite a couple of things. In 1989, this is not the first time Scott Stringer was cruising to victory in a campaign, and in what we'll call an inefficient intermeddler came in, somebody from the outside. Scott was running for the city council in 1989. He was not successful. That seat was won by Ronnie Eldridge. But during the campaign, Scott went and sought the endorsement of the Amsterdam News, even though there were very few African Americans in that district. And it was told to me by members of the Amsterdam News board. They said, Scott, tell us about Amsterdam Houses, which is on the west side, not related to the Amsterdam News. And they said, how do you feel about the people there? And Scott Stringer said, it's my base. And they couldn't believe that a white politician would call a group of African Americans his base. On another occasion, when Scott and I were having a dispute about delegates to the Democratic National Convention, and there was something Scott really needed from us, we traded it to him in exchange for 5 delegates from the Upper West Side, 5 delegates from the Upper West Side voted for Jesse Jackson in 1988. So I think the thing about Scott is that all of us learn to live together, but Scott grew up that way. He grew up in Washington Heights. Now, I heard some, I don't know where I got this, that Scott is a Mama Luke, he's a nebbish, he's
Yeah.
he's
Slubby.
and
I'm a
a
shot,
slub.
I'm a shot.
He grew up in Washington Heights and wants to remind people that didn't grow up there that if they are looking for trouble, they will get it. So my point is that Scott Stringer really, to me, has moved up the political ladder. He's much loved but underpaid, just like I was. He can't come into a race and throw money at it and win at the last minute. He can't do it. And he has positioned himself in a way that he knows all the people he's going to have to interact with. So at this moment, at this time, and in this race, for me, it's Scott Stringer.
Unequivocal support.
Unequivocal.
And yet, you do, though, respect Elliot Spitzer, who had been the governor when you were lieutenant governor.
Let me tell you, Curtis, there are media outlets who can't wait for me to say something negative about the former governor so they can make that the story and turn this into a fight between him and me. He understands that Scott's my candidate, and I understand that he did a great deal for me that I'll always give him credit for, and we will still be friends. But it's a reality in politics. The person that gets out there, the person that works the hardest, the person that's been working on it the longest is usually the winner.
Now, let me ask you, Scott Stringer. There was a night that you were at home with your lovely wife and your two young children, and I'm sure you were counting off the days before you would enter the general election. You didn't know it yet, although there was a new candidate, John Burnett, for the Republicans, some other third-party candidates. But it seemed like you were sailing to victory. And then as the window of opportunity was closing on any Democratic challenges, Elliot Spitzer on a Sunday jumped in, both feet first, within a matter of days had assembled 27,000 signatures. Do you have any regrets at that moment that you didn't try challenging those signatures, since we have no idea where they came from, whether they were real, bogus, they've been taken out of a telephone book? Was that a tactical error on your part?
No, not at all. In fact, I always felt that for the office of Comptroller, I would have a competitive primary and a competitive general election. John Burnett's a good guy. He's going to work very hard, whoever wins the Democratic primary. But we always thought that Anthony Weiner would run for Comptroller. He had polled to figure out whether he should do that. We had heard that Elliot was trying to figure out a way back in. So we were very prepared for anything to happen. And I'm not going to challenge someone's petitions. I never have. If you can't beat the candidate, then you shouldn't be the Comptroller. And when I beat him, and I'm going to beat him 3 weeks from now, I will have a mandate. I will have gotten known around the city. I'll be able to do my job. I will have learned about all the communities around the city. And that is where I believe is where I should end up.
Well, Scott, speaking of being known around the city, did you ever imagine 25 years ago when we would sit and talk that we would both become known around the world thanks to the same man, Elliot Spitzer? By resigning in 2008 and then by running this year, he's put you and me on the cover of every newspaper around the world. And for the first time, we became darlings of the New York Post. And we'd like to thank the Post for their hopefully continued support.
Amen. Well, David, since I've known you for the last 30 years, it's never been anything but a roller coaster. When you look at the friendship that we have and the trials and tribulations, it's amazing. I love that picture.
Now,
we're looking at the Post. It's a beautiful picture. David Patterson, myself, endorsed by David Patterson. Can I say something about David Patterson?
Of course.
This is not an easy endorsement for him to make. He has a relationship with Elliot. I would expect him to respect that, and he has. I think David Patterson showed how honorable he is. He can support somebody without disrespecting somebody he has a relationship with. And I think we need more of that in politics. Sometimes it's harder to just support someone than try to disparage someone. And I really think he's not getting that credit. And I just want to say to him publicly, thank you, not just for your endorsement, but for the fact that it's about me, not at the expense of somebody else. And I actually think Elliot feels the same way.
Anyway, I think this loyalty goes way, way back to when you were both young whippersnappers. And you, Scott Stringer, at that moment in time, had not entered public service full-time. You were trying your hand like so many other young entrepreneurs, like Max and Vinny here at the Statler Grill hat and running a gin mill and a restaurant.
That's right.
And David Patterson built up such a huge tab over that year that it caused you to declare bankruptcy.
They had to close the place. I'm sorry. I still owe Scott a lot of money.
All right, let me do this tonight because it's important. I'm in a tough campaign. It's time for David to settle that bill. And it's time I'm going to collect. Curtis, you brought me here for that reason. We got to make this good, Governor. The endorsement's not enough. You owe me $18.75.
But now,
no, you owe me $18.75.
but one thing you can relate to, Scott Stringer, is there are a lot of businessmen and businesswomen listening, small, mid-level size. Many of them will fail within 5 years, a majority of them. How difficult was it to go? You were basically weaned for public service. You came from a family of public servants. You were out there campaigning at a very young age along with Governor David Patterson, although at that point you didn't know one another. But when you ventured in to the private sector, you now feel the pain of what so many New Yorkers experience on a regular basis, when not only do they have to deal with the day-to-day problems of running a business, but the fees, the fines, the tickets, the hidden taxes that literally put them on the brink of having to declare Chapter 11. Do you feel some empathy and sympathy for them because you briefly went through that?
Listen, 24 years ago, like a lot of young folks, I took a shot. It's a tough business. Any small business is really tough. You open up with a lot of promise, but it's tough to pay the rent and pay the bills. The landlord never gives you a break because they always know there's someone coming after you. I think the entrepreneurs in this city deserve a lot of credit, and it's always given me a sense that we in city government should be more respectful of the people who try to take that chance. And we have to elevate these businesses and help them. And as the controller, I'm going to watch out for the people in the middle class, the people who struggle. Elliot Spitzer got to inherit a business, but most people in New York have to build a business, and that's the difference. And in my brief time, a long time ago, trying to take my shot, it's not easy, and I respect the people who keep it going, and I think we should be more mindful of folks out there.
Now, when we come back, you believe in transparency, Manhattan Borough President Scott Stringer?
What's your question,
I
Curtis?
want to know what took place in this very restaurant weeks ago at a brunch lunch in which I wasn't invited, when Max and Vinny were sworn to secrecy, and it was the bartender, Tierney, who dropped dime on the sit-down you had with Governor David Patterson. And I noticed ever since that sit-down, have you been rock'em, sock'em, you give as well as you take. You have totally come out like a fighting political machine against the former gov. No, call me the State Attorney General, Elliot Spitzer. We'll get into that when we return right here at the Statler Grill, where they don't water down the drinks, where they're not in the realm of declaring bankruptcy because the place is packed. And the steaks and chops and veggies and fish are the very best you can get right here on your place to be, AM 970, The Answer.
It's Curtis and the Gov, live from the Statler Grill on AM 970. The Answer.
624 once again, ladies and gentlemen. We're back at the Statler Grill, a continuation of our discussion with Manhattan Borough President Scott Stringer, candidate for the Democratic nomination to be determined on September 10th. Democrats and Republicans, you got to come out and vote. A number of citywide elections. You got to vote in the primary in order to get your candidate into the general election. And boy, we got a smoker here with the emergence of Comey Attorney General Elliot Spitzer versus Scott Stringer. You had, Scott, two all-out brawls and battles of debates. First on Channel 7 Sunday morning, followed quickly the night after on New York 1. Back-to-back, belly-to-belly. You gave as well as you received, you tapped the gloves, and it was like both of you were just at each other. You have one more debate coming up, which I think is the end of this week. What's going to be the strategy? Because I want to know from your mindset whether taking him on mano a mano like Roberto Duran was in your best interest in terms of what the viewers were watching.
Well, I think the viewers wanted to see my strength, that I could get into the ring and talk about the issues that working people care about, but also compare my record of integrity and experience in leadership with his problems as governor of the state of New York. You know, he left David Patterson a $23 billion budget deficit. I remember when David, at his first speech, got up and warned everybody that we had some very troubled times and that we had to act quickly. And that's the kind of thinking a controller has to be about, being able to warn executives trouble ahead. But Elliott gave us that budget deficit. My strategy for the debate is going to be about a little more rope-a-dope. You know, I'll push and pull, but I also want to get out my message. I don't want to just talk about his failure. I want to talk about my vision for the office. There's a lot the controller could do to fight for working people, rooting out waste, auditing agencies, making a difference. And I'm going to be able to do that hopefully Thursday night.
Now, Scott, I have a question, oddly enough, about being controller. Maybe we could talk about that for a minute. So what's been happening in our economy is that the Federal Reserve continues to pour money into the economy at very low interest rates, and yet the economy drones on inexorably. The first 2 quarters of this year, the economy grew by only 1%. That's why the stock market is up, because when you pour money into the market, you make the dollar has less value and the stocks go up. So the people on Wall Street are doing well, the people on Main Street are not. And my question to you is, there's a point that the Fed will not be able to keep feeding that tiger. And we could go back into a double dip, a recession. As a person that has fought for so many things against poor housing, crime, unemployment and underemployment, poor and inadequate health care facilities, domestic violence, the educational system, you may be put in the same position that I was put. Your heart is in one place, but the city's fiscal prospects are the other. Tell me how you'll try to address that kind of issue.
I think it's a very good question. A couple of things the controller has to think about. The first is you're the fiduciary of a $140 billion pension fund. You have this retirement security in your hands of 650,000 individuals. Half are retired and someday they want to be. So you have to look at the asset allocation and how you approach a fluctuating economy through the lens of hitting your actuarial targets for the fund. So that's number one. The second part of what the controller has to think about is to continue what John Liu and the mayor's done, which is while we have low interest rates, we have to do debt financing that can save us hundreds of millions of dollars, and there's probably a short window to do that. And I think that is the specific responsibility of the controller. I agree with you. It would break my heart to look at the job and say what we can't do. But I also think as controller, you have to be honest about what the city can do, and you also have to say, look, there are limits to what we can do. The next mayor is going to have to work with organized labor and go to a collective bargaining process and negotiate labor contracts. That's going to be very tough, and the controller is going to have to call it as he sees it and be honest about what we can get to. And that is part of this job, and it requires somebody who has enormous integrity, because people want to trust what the controller says. So you can't, in your previous job, be thrown out of office, resign, because you didn't obey the law and you didn't value the trust that you were given. And I think that's a legitimate issue for this campaign.
I think Elliot Spitzer's support, though, comes down to the fact that people like that he took on Wall Street. He anointed himself the sheriff of Wall Street, but that's what resonates amongst his supporters. They like the fact that he took on the titans in Wall Street. Can you aggressively take them on?
I have taken on government agencies. I've stood up to the mayor and the mayor before that. The issue is not taking on Wall Street, because you're not the Attorney General. You don't have a badge anymore. If you want to be Attorney General, then go run against Eric Schneiderman and lose to him. But to be the controller, where you actually have to work collaboratively with people, the voters understand the job. The voters know that this is not to be the sheriff. This is to be two things: someone who can actually work to get things done, save taxpayer money, root out waste and fraud, and also be fiercely independent. And that is what I bring to the table. People, at the end of the day, we're going to win this race
now,
because people want someone with integrity in this job.
One quick question, because I know you have to go. Many people out there that I've run into think you're running against Anthony Weiner. Does that make it difficult to get them to focus because they know Weiner's running for the mayoralty? They know you had run for the mayoralty, and then you decided not to continue. Has that made your ability to stay on track difficult, that they're thinking of Elliot Spitzer not as the former governor, but rather as the former Congressman Anthony Weiner?
I think there's confusion. Some people come up to me and say, listen, I'm voting for you. You got to beat Elliot Weiner. I think there's just this crazy, but I think all that gets sorted out. At the end of the day, people will know who I'm running against. The voters in the city will know me. When people know me and they know him, they vote for me. And that's what we're going to do.
Would you stop taking him out and campaigning with you, Governor David Patterson, because he uses as an excuse, I need a mental health break from all the campaigning I'm doing with my friend Scott.
Can I tell you something? Having David Patterson out there was having like a gold card. People were coming by, they were looking at me and then saying, you got him, you got me. And I think that's a great thing. So I'm going to borrow him. I'll bring him back to you. But
the diva that he is with all his demands with Jeeves and the stretch limo outside. Look at this. This is unbelievable.
But let me tell you something. He may leave here in a limousine, but when he's up in the morning at 7 a.m. at 135th and Lennox talking about his friend Scott, not criticizing my opponent because he's an honorable man, but talking about I'm for Scott Stringer for Comptroller. Do you know the movement out there? Do you know what's happening out there? I got David Patterson, and I'm sticking to it. I'm proud of him.
Well, finally, Scott, first of all, thank you for the wonderful things you've said. I'm just wanted to close by asking you, in this climate and in just this year of changes and roller coaster activities in this campaign, are you satisfied that you've been able to talk about the issues that you championed before? And since people are just coming to know you, tell them a few things you did previously as an assemblyman and even as an advocate before you went to public office.
You know, as an assembly member, I took on the leadership of my own party, fought to end empty seat voting, required legislators to sit in their seat and debate bills. I did that with other progressive legislators. I took on the fight of NYCHA housing. We went through thousands of elevator inspection reports with the goal of fixing elevators in public housing. We did this. We blew the whistle on outside consultants used by the Department of Education, money that wasn't going into the classrooms. We did that as well. I've been a strong advocate on the pension fund, watching the retirement security of people. I've talked about this economy, the high-tech economy, and how working people, the children of the next generation, can access these jobs, coder jobs and programmer jobs that pay $60,000 and $70,000 a year. But you know what? We're not training our kids for this emerging industry. So what happens is they don't get the economic benefit. We got to fight for every child in the city to give them the skills they need.
And one easy final question, Scott. Why have the candidates who ran for public office, for public advocate, and lost, like you and me, done better than any of them who won?
And on that note, it is great to be on the Curtis Sliwa and David Patterson AM 970 show.
Appreciate it.
It's great to, and I will be back.
Yes.
Thank you.
And
Thank you
in
very
fact,
much. Thank you.
To give the balance, Elliot Spitzer will be here on Friday. So this is your place for political discussion right here on AM 970, The Answer at the Statler Grill.